The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed like trapped insects as I stared at the photographs in my trembling hands. 4 months before his accident. 4 months before he looked at me with vacant eyes and asked who I was. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself as the world tilted beneath my feet. "Mrs. Reed?" Dr. Patel's voice came from somewhere far away, though she stood right in front of me. I quickly slipped the photos back into the envelope I'd found at the bottom of Ethan's gym bag. "Not now. I couldn't process this now. How is he today?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. "The same," she replied, her eyes softening with practiced sympathy. "The neurological tests show normal brain function, but the autobiographical memory gaps persist." She hesitated. "Mrs. Reed, Amelia, we've discussed this before. Sometimes the mind protects itself. Trauma can cause selective memory loss." I nodded, clutching the envelope tighter. "And sometimes people lie," I whispered. "Pardon?" "Nothing." I straightened my shoulders. "I'd like to see my husband now." As I walked into his room, Ethan's face brightened with recognition, the new recognition we'd built over the last 3 months. Not the recognition of a man who'd slept beside me for 5 years. Not the recognition of a man who'd whispered promises against my skin in the dark. His smile was genuine and warm, but it was the smile of a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Amelia," he said, testing my name on his tongue like it was still new to him. In my pocket, the photograph burned. Ethan on a beach I didn't recognize. His arms wrapped around a woman I'd never seen, both of them laughing into the camera. The timestamp in the corner, February 15th. His accident had been in June. I smiled back and wondered if he could see the change in my eyes. The moment love began to curdle into something darker. "I brought you some clothes," I said, setting down his gym bag, now lighter by the weight of his secrets. "The doctor says you might be able to come home next week." Home. Where I would finally discover who my husband really was, and what else he'd been hiding from me. I first met Ethan Reed on a Tuesday evening at Westlake Community College, where I taught introductory photography. He was 32, an environmental lawyer with kind eyes and an easy laugh, taking my class because, as he put it, "I've spent my whole life looking at the world through legal briefs. I want to see it through something else for a change." I was 30, recently relocated after a bitter breakup, still finding my footing in a new city. Ethan stayed after class each week, asking thoughtful questions about composition and light. By the end of the semester, we were having coffee together, then dinner, then spending weekends exploring the city with our cameras. "You have an eye for the truth," he told me once, examining a black and white portrait I'd taken. "You see past the surface?" The irony of that statement would return to haunt me years later. We married 11 months after we met, a small ceremony at the botanical gardens where he'd proposed. For 5 years, we built what I thought was a happy life, not perfect, but ours. We had our arguments, our disappointments, primarily about children. I wanted them, he hesitated, but nothing that suggested my husband was capable of elaborate deception. Then came the accident. It happened on a rain-slick highway, a truck hydroplaning into Ethan's car, sending it spinning into the concrete barrier. The airbag saved his life but couldn't protect his head from the impact against the driver's window. I rushed to the hospital to find him awake but confused, with a severe concussion, and what the doctors initially thought was temporary disorientation. As the hours passed, it became clear something was wrong. Ethan recognized his parents when they arrived. He knew basic facts about his life and work. But when he looked at me, there was nothing. No recognition. No emotion. "I'm sorry," he said, staring at the wedding ring I held out to him. "They tell me you're my wife, but I can't remember our life together." The diagnosis was retrograde amnesia, specifically affecting his autobiographical memory of the past 6 years, encompassing our entire relationship. The neurologists explained it was rare, but not unheard of for trauma to selectively erase certain periods of memory. "The brain is still largely a mystery to us," Dr. Patel said gently. "Memory isn't stored like files in a computer. It's complex, interconnected. Sometimes certain neural pathways are damaged while others remain intact. They told me his memories might return gradually or all at once, or they might never return at all. The only treatment was patience, therapy, and gradually reintroducing him to his life. Our life. So that's what I did. I brought photo albums to the hospital. I told him stories of our first date, our wedding, our honeymoon in Portugal. I played him our favorite songs and brought meals from our favorite restaurant. I became the keeper of our history, the sole witness to our love. And Ethan was grateful, kind. He apologized constantly for not remembering, for the pain he saw in my eyes when he'd ask basic questions about our relationship. He tried so hard that sometimes I felt guilty for my own frustration. "It must be like living with a stranger," he said one night at the hospital, about 2 weeks after the accident. "No," I lied. "It's like living with my husband who's just forgotten some things. But you're still you." The truth was, he both was and wasn't the man I married. His mannerisms were the same, the way he absent-mindedly ran his hand through his hair when thinking, how he tapped his fingers in sequence when anxious. But there were differences, too, subtle shifts in his personality that I couldn't quite define. He was more reserved with me, less playful. He didn't finish my sentences anymore. And sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window with an expression I'd never seen before, distant and somehow calculating. I chalked it up to the trauma, the disorientation of waking up to a life you couldn't remember. How could that not change a person? 3 months passed. Ethan returned to work part-time, where his legal knowledge remained intact, even if his memory of specific cases was spotty. At home, we developed a new routine. We were almost like roommates at first, then tentative friends, then something approaching a couple, though we still slept in separate rooms. "I want to earn my way back to being your husband," he said. "Not just assume the role because it's what the paperwork says." I found it sweet at the time, respectful. Then came that Wednesday in September, when Ethan asked me to bring his gym bag to the hospital for his physical therapy session. I grabbed it from the closet, and as I lifted it, something fell from an inner pocket, a manila envelope unsealed. I should have just put it back. That's what trust dictates. But something, intuition perhaps, or the slight tremble in Ethan's voice when he'd asked for the bag, made me open it. Inside were 5 photographs. Beach photos. Ethan with a woman I'd never seen before, tall, with dark curly hair and a wide, confident smile. In one, they were building a sandcastle. In another, sharing what looked like a cocktail, 2 straws in 1 oversized glass. In the third, walking along the shoreline at sunset, hand in hand. The fourth showed them kissing beneath a palm tree, her hands tangled in his hair. But it was the 5th photo that stopped my heart. Both of them, arms around each other, laughing into the camera with the kind of unguarded joy that can't be faked. And in the corner, the digital timestamp, February 15th, 2024, 4 months before the accident. 4 months before Ethan supposedly forgot our entire relationship. I sat down hard on the closet floor, the photographs spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. If Ethan had been with this woman in February, still himself, still in possession of all his memories, including his memories of me, of our marriage, then what did that mean about his amnesia? Was it possible to fake something like that? To convince doctors, therapists, even me? And if so, why? What could be worth such an elaborate deception? I gathered the photographs with numb fingers, returned them to the envelope, and slid them into my pocket. I brought Ethan his gym bag that afternoon, watching his face carefully for any sign that he remembered what had been inside it, what I might have found, but he just smiled, that new smile of his, the one that never quite reached his eyes and thanked me for being so supportive. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said. I smiled back and thought, "You're about to find out." I didn't confront Ethan immediately. Something told me I needed more information before showing my hand. Instead, I did what any photography teacher with access to digital imaging software would do. I zoomed in on the photos, looking for clues. The beach appeared tropical. Palm trees, white sand, clear blue water. In the background of one image, I could make out a sign. Welcome to Little Palm Cove. A quick search confirmed it was a small resort town in the Florida Keys. The woman's face yielded no results in reverse image searches. She wasn't tagged in any of Ethan's old social media posts, which were sparse anyway. He'd always been private online. But in one photo, she wore a necklace with a small pendant, the caduceus symbol used by medical professionals. I started with what I knew for certain. In February, when these photos were taken, Ethan had told me he was at an environmental law conference in Chicago. He'd called me each night describing panels he'd attended, colleagues he'd met. He'd even brought me back a snow globe from the Magnificent Mile. Had he even been in Chicago at all? Or had he flown to Florida instead, to meet this woman? I checked our joint credit card statements from February. The hotel charges were indeed from Chicago, along with meals and transportation consistent with his story. But there was a 3-day gap, February 14th, 16th, with no charges at all, as if he'd paid cash, or as if someone else had paid. I needed more, so I did something I'd never done before. I logged into Ethan's email. We'd shared passwords early in our marriage, an act of transparency we both valued, but I'd never had reason to use his. The password still worked. What I found made me physically ill. There were dozens of emails between Ethan and someone named Vanessa Mercer, dating back almost a year. They started professionally. She was a medical researcher working on environmental health impacts, consulting with his law firm on a case. But they quickly became personal, then intimate. I can't stop thinking about our conversation last night. You understand parts of me that I've never shared with anyone. 3 more weeks until Chicago, then Florida. I'm counting down the days. Because sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Like I made a wrong turn somewhere and ended up in a story that wasn't meant for mine. Is that terrible to say? That we all make choices before we fully understand who we are. The question is what we do once we understand. And then, most damning of all, an email from late May, just 2 weeks before the accident. It's all arranged. After next Friday, we can start over. Clean slate, just like we talked about. I know it seems extreme, but I've consulted with colleagues. The condition presents similarly to traumatic amnesia in the early stages. With your injuries as a cover, it will be convincing. By the time anyone might get suspicious, we'll be established elsewhere. I hate the thought of you going through this. But if you're still certain, I'm with you, always. The next email was from Ethan, sent the day before his accident. Cold feet doesn't begin to cover what I'm feeling. But when I imagine a life where I'm truly happy, you're always there. I've made so many mistakes, but loving you isn't one of them. I'll see you on the other side of this. I printed the emails with shaking hands, adding them to the envelope with the photographs. Then I dug deeper. Vanessa Mercer, MD, PhD, was a neurologist specializing in memory disorders, working at Blackwood Research Institute, 3 hours away from our city. Her research focused on the mechanisms of memory formation and loss, including psychological factors that could mimic organic memory disorders. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Ethan and Vanessa had planned this together. The accident might have been real. I doubted even Ethan would risk deliberately injuring himself, but the amnesia was not. It was an elaborate exit strategy, a way for him to leave our marriage without actually leaving, to make me the one to walk away while he played the victim, and I had nearly fallen for it. I had spent 3 months caring for him, grieving for the husband I thought I'd lost, blaming myself for not being memorable enough, for not being able to spark his recognition. All while he remembered everything, our marriage, his affair, his plans to start a new life with another woman, all while he watched me suffer, knowing the truth. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it transformed something in me. The Amelia who had entered that closet and found those photographs no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, colder, someone capable of things the old Amelia would never have considered. As I sat surrounded by the evidence of my husband's betrayal, I made a decision. Ethan and Vanessa had orchestrated an elaborate deception. They had their plan. Now I would make mine. The first step was to learn everything I could about retrograde amnesia, both real and feigned. I read medical journals, patient accounts, and diagnostic criteria. I joined online support groups for spouses of amnesiac patients, sharing sanitized versions of my experience while collecting others' stories for comparison. What emerged was a pattern of discrepancies in Ethan's behavior. Real amnesia patients typically exhibit consistent memory boundaries. If they can't remember their wedding, they also can't remember events surrounding it. Ethan's memory loss was too convenient, too selective. He remembered enough about our relationship to navigate basic interactions but claimed no emotional connection to specific moments I knew had been meaningful. I also noticed how his supposed progress in therapy conveniently recovered memories that were easy to verify through photos or friends' accounts, while more intimate moments remained lost. He was reconstructing a plausible version of our marriage from external evidence, not actually remembering it. Most telling was his reaction when I deliberately misstated details about our past. Real amnesia patients typically show confusion or distress when contradicted about their history. Ethan simply accepted my revisions as if he knew better, but was choosing to go along with my version. All the while, I maintained the facade of the devoted, patient wife. I continued bringing Ethan to therapy, discussing his progress with Dr. Patel, and creating a nurturing environment for his recovery. I needed him, and everyone around us, to believe I was still fully committed to his rehabilitation. But secretly, I was building a case and forming a plan. The second step was to understand Vanessa Mercer. I couldn't confront Ethan effectively without knowing what they had planned next. Social media provided little insight. Like Ethan, she maintained minimal online presence, but professional databases were more revealing. Dr. Mercer had recently requested a sabbatical from Blackwood Institute, effective in 2 months. She'd also published a paper on psychological factors in memory, disorders that included case studies of patients whose symptoms improved when they were removed from environments of emotional conflict or obligation. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. Once enough time had passed to make Ethan's condition seem legitimate. They planned to use the professional recommendation of a respected neurologist, Vanessa herself, to suggest that a fresh start away from the pressure of his forgotten marriage might be therapeutically beneficial. I would be painted as the obstacle to his recovery, my very presence a reminder of what he couldn't remember, couldn't feel. The perfect villain in their story, while they played the reluctant star-crossed lovers, forced by medical necessity to build a new life together. It was elegant, I had to admit. And it might have worked if I hadn't found those photographs. The final step was the most difficult, deciding what I wanted. Revenge, justice? Simply to move on? Each option required a different approach. Revenge would be emotionally satisfying, but legally complicated. Exposing their plan publicly would humiliate them, but might backfire professionally for me. Walking away would be cleanest, but would leave them unpunished, free to enjoy the life they'd built on the ruins of mine. In the end, I chose something between justice and revenge, a solution that would give me closure while ensuring they couldn't simply walk away unscathed. I began laying the groundwork carefully. First, I contacted a lawyer, not from Ethan's firm, and discreetly inquired about the legal implications of medical fraud and insurance claims. Ethan had received a substantial insurance payout for his condition, money that was currently sitting in our joint account. Next, I set up a private meeting with Dr. Patel, ostensibly to discuss concerns about Ethan's home care. I casually mentioned that I'd been keeping a detailed journal of his recovery, including inconsistencies I'd noticed but had been afraid to mention for fear of sounding paranoid. For example, I said, watching her face carefully, sometimes he seems to recognize our friends before I've introduced them. Or he'll avoid asking questions about things I know he shouldn't remember. It's unsettling, Dr. Patel frowned. Memory recovery isn't linear, Amelia. Some associations might trigger recognition that seems out of sequence. Of course, I nodded. But there's something else. He's been having nightmares, talking in his sleep, calling out a name I don't recognize. I paused. Vanessa. I saw the flicker of professional concern in her eyes. Has he mentioned this name while awake? No, I said. And when I asked him about it, he seemed frightened. Then he said he didn't know anyone by that name. This wasn't entirely fabricated. Ethan had indeed called out Vanessa's name in his sleep once, early in his recovery. I'd assumed it was a colleague or a character from a show we'd watched. Now the memory took on new significance. I'd like to observe him more closely during our next session, Doctor, Patel said. There may be some psychological elements we haven't fully explored. With the seeds of doubt planted with his doctor, I moved to the next phase of my plan. I needed to find out exactly when Ethan and Vanessa planned to make their move, which required access to their current communications. Ethan's email no longer contained messages to Vanessa. They'd likely established a more secure method after setting their plan in motion. His phone was password protected with biometrics, but I had noticed he still kept a small leather notebook in his briefcase, old-school lawyer that he was. While he showered one evening, I quickly photographed each page of the notebook. Most contained work notes, but on the back page, I found what I was looking for: a phone number with no name and a series of dates with single-letter notations. The most recent read 10:15 V call and 11:1 BP discussion. I didn't know what BP meant, but I could guess who V was. October 15th, 3 days from now. November 1st, just over 2 weeks away. Their timeline was accelerating. I had limited time to execute my plan, but first, I needed one more piece of confirmation. While Ethan was at physical therapy the next day, I called the number from his notebook, using a prepaid phone I'd purchased. When a woman answered, I said nothing, listening to her hello, then her increasingly impatient repetitions. Finally, she said something that confirmed everything. Ethan, is that you? Are you calling from a different number? Is something wrong? I hung up without speaking. Vanessa's voice was now in my memory, clear, confident, concerned for the man we both loved in vastly different ways. That night, as Ethan and I ate the dinner I'd prepared, his favorite pasta dish, I noted ironically, I decided it was time for the opening move in our final game. I've been thinking, I said casually. Your recovery has plateaued recently. Maybe we should consider consulting a specialist, someone with more experience in unusual memory disorders. Ethan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Dr. Patel is one of the best neurologists in the city. Yes, but there are research institutes doing groundbreaking work in this field. I've been reading about Blackwood Institute. They have an entire department dedicated to memory disorders. I watched the color drain from his face, replaced by a carefully composed expression of casual interest. If you think it would help, he said, too evenly. I do. In fact, I've already reached out to them. We have an appointment next week with their department head. I took a sip of wine. Dr. Vanessa Mercer. Apparently, she's brilliant. The glass in Ethan's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Well, he managed, I'm willing to try anything at this point. I thought you might be, I said, smiling. I'm so glad we're on the same page. I raised my glass. To new beginnings. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan clinked his glass against mine, his eyes never leaving my face, searching for what I knew and what I planned to do with that knowledge. The game was on. The morning of October 15th, the day marked V call in Ethan's notebook, I deliberately left the house early, telling him I had a faculty meeting. Instead, I parked down the street and waited, watching our house through binoculars I'd borrowed from our neglected birdwatching kit. At precisely 10 a.m., Ethan stepped onto our front porch, phone in hand. He looked around furtively before dialing, then spoke for nearly 20 minutes, his free hand gesturing with the animation I remembered from our early days together, an enthusiasm he rarely showed around me anymore. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language told me enough. This was not a man struggling with memory loss. This was a man making plans, a man with purpose and clarity. When he went back inside, I drove to campus, taught my afternoon classes with mechanical precision, then returned home to find Ethan unusually attentive. He'd prepared dinner, another first since his amnesia, and suggested we watch a movie together. "One of your favorites," he said, holding up The Apartment, a film we'd watched on our third date. "You remembered that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He backtracked smoothly. "It was in your movie collection with a note saying it was your favorite. I thought it might be nice to create some new memories around things that were special to you, to us, before." I nearly admired the performance. The thoughtful husband, working so hard to reconstruct a relationship he couldn't remember. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been touched by the gesture. Might have seen it as a turning point in his recovery. Instead, I recognized it for what it was, groundwork for their BP discussion scheduled for November the 1st. I guess now that BP stood for breakup plan, the conversation where he would gently, regretfully tell me that despite everyone's best efforts, he couldn't reconnect with our marriage. That continuing to try was causing him psychological distress. That perhaps, for everyone's sake, we should consider separation. He was establishing a narrative of having tried his best, of having made a good faith effort to salvage our relationship, setting the stage for his blameless exit. I matched his performance with one of my own, expressing delight at his thoughtfulness and cuddling beside him on the couch as we watched the film. I even let him hold my hand during the emotional scenes, feeling his wedding ring, the one he'd once claimed not to recognize, press against my fingers. The next day, I moved forward with my own plan, meeting with the lawyer I'd consulted earlier. I brought copies of Ethan's medical records. As his legal caretaker during his recovery, I had access, the insurance claim documents, and the evidence I'd gathered of his deception. "This is quite a situation," Mrs. Reed, the lawyer, Ms. Hargrove said after reviewing everything. "If what you're suggesting is true, it constitutes insurance fraud at minimum. Possibly medical fraud as well, especially if this Dr. Mercer falsified any assessments." "And if I can prove it?" I asked. "Then you'd be entitled to the entirety of the insurance payout, plus potentially additional damages in a divorce settlement." She looked at me carefully. "But proving it will be difficult. Medical conditions, especially neurological ones, have subjective components. Unless you have explicit communication where they discuss faking his condition." I slid the printouts of the emails across her desk. She read them in silence, her eyebrows rising higher with each page. "This changes things considerably," she said finally. "Still, they could claim these were taken out of context. That starting over referred to something else entirely. What would you need to make the case ironclad?" "Ideally, a confession. Recorded or in writing, or testimony from Dr. Mercer herself, though I find that unlikely unless she's offered immunity from her own charges." I nodded, already formulating the next phase of my plan. "I understand. Thank you for your time." 2 days later, I received a call from Dr. Patel's office, asking to schedule an urgent appointment with both Ethan and me. The receptionist wouldn't provide details over the phone, but her tone suggested it was important. When we arrived at her office the following afternoon, Dr. Patel's typically warm demeanor was replaced by clinical formality. "I've been reviewing Ethan's case," she began without preamble, "and I've noticed some inconsistencies that concern me." Beside me, Ethan stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of inconsistencies?" he asked. "Your PET scans don't show the patterns we typically see in retrograde amnesia patients. Your cognitive testing reveals unusual selectivity in your memory gaps, and your sleep study shows normal REM patterns inconsistent with traumatic memory disruption." She turned to me. "Additionally, Amelia mentioned you've been speaking a name in your sleep, Vanessa. When I researched colleagues who might consult on your case, I discovered Dr. Vanessa Mercer, whose specialty aligns remarkably well with your symptoms." "I don't understand what you're suggesting," Ethan said, but I could hear the undertone of panic in his voice. "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Dr. Patel replied evenly, "but I am recommending a more comprehensive evaluation, one that includes a psychological component alongside the neurological testing we've already done." She looked directly at Ethan. Memory is complex. Mr. Reed, sometimes our minds protect us from things we aren't ready to face. And sometimes, consciously or unconsciously, we may elaborate on symptoms for reasons that aren't immediately apparent, even to ourselves. The implication hung in the air between us. Dr. Patel wasn't directly accusing Ethan of faking, but she was opening the door to that possibility, framing it as a psychological issue rather than deliberate fraud, but raising the question nonetheless. I've scheduled you for evaluation with our neuropsychiatric team next week, she continued. In the meantime, I'd like you to keep a detailed journal of any memory flashes or dreams you experience, no matter how insignificant they might seem. As we left her office, Ethan was silent, his face pale. Once in the car, he turned to me. "Do you think I'm lying?" he asked quietly. "About not remembering our marriage?" I met his gaze steadily, my heart pounding with the confrontation I'd both dreaded and anticipated. "Are you?" For a moment, just a moment, I saw the mask slip. A flicker of the real Ethan, calculating, cornered. "How can you ask me that?" he said, recovering quickly. "After everything we've been through? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about Vanessa." His face went completely still. A stillness I recognized from courtroom videos of him questioning hostile witnesses. The calm before a strategic response. "The name you mentioned," he said carefully. "From my nightmares. No, the name from your reality." I turned to face him fully. "I know about Florida, Ethan. I know about the plan you made together. I know everything." For several seconds, the only sound in the car was our breathing. Then Ethan did something that chilled me to the bone. He laughed. A short, dry laugh devoid of humor. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice different now. Harder, no longer maintaining the confused, vulnerable tone he'd used since the accident. "Long enough," I replied. "The question is, what happens now?" "That depends on what you want." The truth would be a start. Ethan sighed, leaning back against the headrest. "The truth is complicated, Amelia. Try me. I've handled complicated for the past 3 months." He turned to study my face, as if seeing me clearly for the first time since his amnesia began. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him that denial was pointless. "I never planned to hurt you," he began. "Save it." I cut him off. "I've read your emails. You and Vanessa planned this meticulously. The only thing you didn't plan was me finding out." "What do you want?" he asked again, more urgently. "Money? The house? A public apology? Tell me your price, and we can end this quietly." The coldness of it, the assumption that my pain could be negotiated away, that my dignity had a price tag, ignited something fierce inside me. "Oh, we're well past quiet, Ethan." I started the car. "We have an appointment with Dr. Mercer next week, remember? I'm looking forward to meeting the woman who helped you orchestrate this. What should we call it? Performance art? Social experiment? Amelia, please, you know what's ironic? All those years you spent building your reputation as an ethical lawyer, fighting for environmental justice, standing up for the truth, and underneath it all, you're just another liar. Capable of watching someone who loved you suffer day after day while you played the victim." "It wasn't like that," he insisted. "I was trapped in a life I never fully chose. You and I, we were good on paper, but something was always missing. With Vanessa—" "Save the soulmate speech," I interrupted. "This isn't about who you love. It's about how you chose to leave. You could have asked for a divorce like a normal person. Instead, you constructed an elaborate fraud, gaslighted me for months, and collected an insurance payout in the process." I pulled out of the parking lot, heading home, the home that no longer felt like mine. "So what now?" Ethan asked quietly. "You expose me? Ruin both our lives?" "Now," I said, "we finish what you started. We have an appointment with Dr. Mercer, and we're going to keep it." The rest of the drive passed in silence, both of us contemplating the confrontation to come, and the wreckage of the life we'd once shared. The Blackwood Institute sprawled across a wooded campus, its modern glass buildings reflecting the autumn trees like mirrors. As we walked from the parking lot, Ethan tried one last time to dissuade me. "This won't end well for anyone. he said quietly. Not for me, not for Vanessa, and not for you. You should have thought of that before you decided to play dead in your own marriage. He grabbed my arm, forcing me to stop. Listen to me. I know you're hurt, but hurt? I laughed. Hurt is what you feel when someone forgets your birthday or says something thoughtless. This is something else entirely. I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce, he said desperately. The house, the savings, all of it. Just don't do this. I looked at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. Take your hand off me, Ethan. We have an appointment to keep. Inside, the reception area was minimalist and soothing, all pale woods and muted blues, more like a luxury spa than a medical facility. The receptionist directed us to the 4th floor, where Dr. Mercer's office was located. As we rode the elevator in tense silence, I thought about what awaited us. Vanessa had no idea I'd discovered their plan. She was expecting to meet the clueless wife, the devoted caretaker still believing in her husband's condition. The woman they'd both been deceiving for months. What would her face reveal when she saw me? Would she maintain the facade of the objective medical professional, or would she betray herself with a glance, a hesitation? The elevator doors opened to reveal a sleek corridor lined with offices. At the far end, a tall woman with dark curly hair stood outside one of the doors, reviewing a file. Even at a distance, I recognized her from the photographs, Vanessa Mercer. She looked up as we approached, her professional smile freezing as she registered who we were. Her eyes flicked from Ethan to me, then back again, a silent question passing between them. Dr. Mercer, I said, extending my hand. I'm Amelia Reed, we spoke on the phone. Thank you for agreeing to consult on my husband's case. She recovered quickly, shaking my hand with the perfect pressure of someone used to establishing rapport with patients' families. Of course, please come in. Her office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the autumn forest. Diplomas and awards lined one wall, while another displayed brain scans and diagrams. She gestured for us to sit in the chairs across from her desk. Before we begin, she said, I should mention that I've reviewed the records sent by Dr. Patel. Mr. Reed's case is unusual, but not unprecedented in my experience. Really? I said. I'd love to hear about similar cases you've encountered, especially ones involving insurance claims. A flicker of unease crossed her face. Perhaps we should start with some baseline questions for Mr. Reed, to establish where we are currently. Actually, I interrupted, I think we should start by acknowledging what's really happening here. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope containing the photographs and emails, placing it on her desk. I believe you're already familiar with my husband, Dr. Mercer. More familiar than I realized until recently. Vanessa didn't touch the envelope, but her eyes fixed on it like it might explode. Mrs. Reed, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I opened the envelope and spread the beach photographs across her desk. Fact. You and my husband were involved in a relationship before his accident. Fact. You conspired together to fake his amnesia as a way to end our marriage. Fact, you abused your medical credentials to lend credibility to this fraud. The room fell into a charged silence. Vanessa's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure with impressive control. These photographs prove nothing except that your husband and I met, which isn't a crime, she said evenly. As for the rest of your accusations, they're completely unfounded. Are they? I pulled out the printed emails. Would you like me to read these aloud? The ones where you discuss how to convincingly fake amnesia. Where you mention consulting with colleagues about how the condition presents similarly to traumatic amnesia. Where you outline your plan to start a new life together after enough time has passed to make the deception believable. Ethan, who had been silent until now, put his head in his hands. Enough, Amelia, please. No, not nearly enough, I said. For 3 months, I've watched my husband pretend not to remember our life together. I've agonized over every detail, trying to spark some recognition. I've blamed myself for not being memorable enough, for not being able to reach him. All while he remembered everything and was just waiting for the right moment to leave. I turned to Vanessa. And you a doctor, Someone who's supposed to heal, not harm. You used your knowledge to help orchestrate psychological torture. Do you know what it does to someone to be erased from the memory of the person they love most? To be looked at like a stranger by their own husband? Vanessa's professional demeanor cracked slightly. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said quietly. The plan was for a clean break. A few weeks of confusion, then an amicable separation based on medical necessity. No one was supposed to get hurt. I laughed bitterly. No one was supposed to get hurt? Are you serious? You literally planned to convince me that my husband's brain had been damaged to the point where he couldn't remember our entire relationship. How exactly did you think that wouldn't hurt me? Ethan stood abruptly. This has gone far enough. Amelia, what do you want? Just tell us so we can end this. I looked at the two of them, the man I had loved and the woman he had chosen instead, and felt a strange calm settle over me. What I want is simple, I said. A confession, written and signed by both of you, admitting to insurance fraud and medical malpractice. Once I have that, we can discuss terms. That's professional suicide, Vanessa objected. I'd lose my license, my career. You should have considered that before using your medical knowledge to perpetrate fraud, I replied coldly. And if we refuse? Ethan asked. I pulled out my phone. Then I take everything I have to the police, the insurance company, the medical board, and the partners at your firm. I've made copies of all of this, of course, stored in multiple locations. There's also the audio recording I made of our conversation in the car yesterday, where you essentially admitted to faking your condition. This was a bluff. I hadn't actually recorded our conversation, but Ethan couldn't know that. I watched his face drain of color as he contemplated the ramifications. You're bluffing, Vanessa said, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Am I? I stood up, gathering the photographs and emails. I guess you'll find out when the police arrive at your door, or when you're called before the medical ethics board, or when the story breaks in the press. Respected neurologist helps lawyer fake amnesia to abandon wife. I'm sure it will make fascinating reading. Wait, Ethan said, reaching for my arm. Just wait. We need to think about this. You've had months to think, I replied, pulling away from his touch. I've had days, but I'm the one with the evidence and the moral high ground. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to write that confession. Now, both of you. Then we're going to discuss a settlement that compensates me for what you've put me through. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. After that, I go public with everything. Outside in the hallway, I finally allowed myself to shake, pressing my back against the wall and breathing deeply to steady myself. Through the closed door, I could hear their urgent, hushed voices, but I couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. I had said what I came to say, laid out my terms. The next move was theirs. The confession arrived by courier the next morning, 2 typed pages with both their signatures. Notarized at Ethan's firm by a junior associate who likely had no idea what he was witnessing. It was carefully worded but comprehensive, admitting to deliberate misrepresentation of medical symptoms and collusion to file a fraudulent insurance claim. Along with it came a proposed settlement. The house, our joint savings, and an additional sum that made my eyes widen, all in exchange for my silence and a no-fault divorce. I called Ms. Hargrove immediately, who reviewed the documents with appropriate professional astonishment. This is more than I expected, she admitted. The confession alone gives you significant leverage, but the settlement offer is extraordinarily generous. They have more to lose than I do, I explained. Ethan's firm handles multi-million-dollar environmental cases. His reputation is everything. And Vanessa's research grants depend on her professional standing. They're not just buying my silence. They're buying back their futures. Are you planning to accept? I stared out the window at the garden Ethan and I had planted together our first spring in the house. The roses were fading now, curling at the edges with the approach of winter. Yes, I said finally, with one addition. The final meeting took place in Ms. Hargrove's office 3 days later. Ethan arrived with his own lawyer, a silver-haired man with a perpetual frown. Vanessa came separately, accompanied by a sharp-featured woman who specialized in medical license defense. They sat across from me, these two people who had conspired to erase me from their story, looking more drained and defeated than I had expected. Whatever fantasy they'd constructed about their future together had crumbled under the weight of reality. Ms. Hargrove outlined the terms of our agreement. I would receive the house, our savings, and the additional compensation they'd offered. The insurance money would be returned in full, with Ethan claiming a miraculous recovery attributed to an experimental treatment, a fiction that would allow him to avoid criminal charges and save face professionally. In exchange, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement and proceed with a no-fault divorce. There's one additional term, I said when she finished. Dr. Mercer needs to relocate her practice. Permanently. I suggest at least 500 miles from here. Vanessa's lawyer began to object, but Vanessa herself raised a hand to silence her. It's reasonable, she said quietly. I've already been offered a position at a research hospital in Arizona. I was planning to accept regardless. Then we're agreed, Ms. Hargrove said, sliding the documents across the table. One by one, we signed our names, formalizing the end of my marriage and the price of their deception. As we prepared to leave, Ethan hesitated, then approached me. Amelia, I know this doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for everything. You deserved better. I looked at him. This man I had loved. This stranger who had shared my bed and my life, and felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Yes, I said simply. I did. Outside, the November air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a neighboring house. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching Ethan and Vanessa leave separately, headed for different cars and, at least for now, different lives. Whatever future they had imagined together had been irrevocably altered by the choices they'd made, and by my refusal to play the role they'd assigned me in their story. As for me, I was left with a house full of memories, a bank account flush with the price of betrayal, and the daunting freedom of a life I hadn't chosen, but now had to rebuild. That evening, I sat alone in what had been our living room, surrounded by photographs I was finally ready to take down, images of a marriage that had been real for me, if not for him. As I carefully removed them from their frames, I noticed something I had overlooked before. The subtle distance in Ethan's eyes, present even in our wedding photos. Had it always been there, that shadow of reservation? Had I simply chosen not to see it? I gathered the photographs into a box, along with other mementos of our life together. Not to destroy them, but to put them away. To make space for whatever came next. The phone rang, startling me. It was Dr. Patel, Amelia, she said. I just heard from Ethan. He says he's had a breakthrough in his recovery. That his memories are returning. Yes, I replied, unsurprised. Quite miraculous, isn't it? There was a pause. He also mentioned you won't be accompanying him to future appointments. That you're separating. That's right, I see. Another pause. Amelia, as Ethan's doctor, there are things I can't discuss. But as someone who's watched what you've been through these past months, I want to say, whatever led to this decision, I hope it brings you peace. Thank you, I said, touched by her perception and kindness. I think it will. After we hung up, I continued my work of carefully dismantling the visible signs of my marriage. Not erasing them. I would never stoop to that kind of deception, but giving them their proper place in the past. As midnight approached, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and poured a single glass. Then I stepped out onto the back deck, where Ethan and I had spent so many evenings watching the stars emerge. The night was clear, the constellations sharp against the black sky. I raised my glass to them, to the universe that had both broken and remade me. To memory, I whispered. The real kind, and for the first time in months, I felt something like hope stirring in the hollow places where grief had lived. A quiet certainty that whatever came next would be true, would be mine, would be real in ways my marriage had never been. It wasn't the ending I had wanted, but it was an ending I could live with, and a beginning I could build upon.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.